Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you hanging on with us today. I'm going to start off. First question, back to the beginning. So, what made you decide to become an attorney? And tell us about your law school experience.
All right. Well, I guess it was family that drew me to the law practice. Well, I'm the first lawyer in my family, and there are probably 6 or 8 now. My grandfather had been a clerk of court in a small rural county in eastern North Carolina. My mother was one of the first female probation officers ever in North Carolina, and my father was a long-time insurance claims manager, the guy who brought Liberty Mutual to North Carolina before World War II. So anyway, I'd heard around our supper table, there were always stories being told. My mother might be telling stories of tragic circumstances, people in desperate need, maybe a woman who's on probation because she had to steal food because she was laid off at the textile mill and had no other choices. We'd never heard of fentanyl. She didn't have many cases probably of drugs like we might have now. But I drove the car for her. She had 17 counties to cover, every woman that was on probation between Hillsborough, North Wilkesboro, Asheboro, Winston-Salem, all of that. And so I heard lots of those stories, and then at the supper table, my father might talk about some terrible injury, because a lot of what their work was workers' compensation. And so I heard stories all the time at the supper table. And I heard stories about lawyers doing good things, working hard, but always there with a joke and a funny story to tell about something that happened at the courthouse and the crazy people that come and go at most any courthouse. And so I was good in history, interested in public affairs, politics, and those kinds of things, and it caused me to go to law school. But maybe for everyone, but certainly for me, there were a couple of 3 turning points that made a huge difference. One was the personal interview at Wake Forest Law School. I had gotten married right out of high school and had gone through Duke University in 3 years. Worked with part-time jobs, etc. And, when kids talk about taking 12 and 13 hours and thinking they're busy, I was taking 18 every semester and never had time to worry about whether I was busy or not. And so I went for that personal interview at Wake Forest, and at that time it was sort of generally understood in the scuttlebutt was you weren't going to get into Wake Forest Law School if you didn't go have that personal interview. So I went. And Dean Weathers took an interest in me, and when we got through that interview, he told me that he thought he could find the money for me to go, and that I was almost certainly in there. I had some of the highest LSAT scores, combined with some of the worst grades, probably anybody that he was talking to. But on the other hand, it's hard to have all A's when you're working like I was working. To get through. So it was a wonderful time in law school. There were 65 in the class when I began. There were about 65 when we finished, but in the meantime, Wake had a program that allowed what we call bastard students to start 1 semester late, go to 2 summer schools, and finish in 2.5 years. And so we had a lot of really bright people in the class that were coming out of the Navy or Vietnam or whatever, that did not have time to mess around and were very, very motivated, and some of them turned out to be some of the best lawyers. Anyway, it was a great time, and about half or more than half of the class was married. A great many of them had been in Vietnam in those years, and anyhow, it was a wonderful time and a great contrast. They were probably socially behind what Duke was at the time, in terms of alcohol and things of that kind. But it was a great experience, and I was selected to something or other in the student bar and that sort of thing, and had a wonderful time. And then that led me to get a job at the Court of Appeals. And before we go too much further, I want to talk about what Raleigh was like and what the bar was like when I came.
Yes, please do. I love that.
And but I got the other turning point was that I landed a job with Judge David Britt at the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and so I was graduating in 1968. That means that I was graduating in that last semester. Martin Luther King was killed. That summer, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. There was a time, and there were widespread Vietnam protests. By the time I was getting out of law school, various ones were being pulled out of law school and in the draft, and everyone was very concerned about their lottery number. I was married and had a child, so it didn't hit me too close because up until the last year, they weren't taking anybody with children and sending them to Vietnam. But anyway, Judge Britt gave me the opportunity, and the Court of Appeals at that time, the Court of Appeals building that we all know now, was under renovation. The Court of Appeals was brand new. It was actually using a meeting room at their legislative building for court, and the offices were down in what was then called the NCNB building, a black building catty-corner from the old Century Post Office downtown. And so, but the court was less than a year old when I went to work there, only 6 judges. And the experience of working with Judge David Britt, who had been a small-town lawyer in Fairmont down near Lumberton, had been in the House of Representatives and ultimately became Speaker of the House, and then one of the first 6 judges on the Court of Appeals. That, again, taught me more than any 1 year of law school to be with him because he knew a lot about how the sausage was made, how the law came to be what it is. And he knew the human side of the law practice from all those years practicing law in a small town, and yet he never finished law school himself. In the late 1930s, he passed the bar after his second year, and went on into law practice at the time. So, I had a lot of connections to previous generations because of that. But let's go back to 1968.
Okay.
Not only was our Justice Center not built, the Wake County Courthouse was not built. The courthouse was under construction, and court was being held in what we called the BB&T building, which was across Fayetteville Street from what we now call the Wake County Office Building, which back then was the Durham Life Insurance Building. CP&L had half of that building. Durham Life Insurance Company had close to half. And then a lot of law firms were up toward the top of what was in the Durham Life building. It was all very different than today. There were only about 400 lawyers, and that includes the ones who were at the Attorney General's office. And so the bar, when I got there, the bar was used to eating lunch at the S&W cafeteria, or when Belk's have the cafeteria across the street. And there were models walking around the cafeteria modeling clothes and the like. It's also different than what we would think of today. But far fewer lawyers. The rules of civil procedure had only just been adopted when, as a matter of fact, I was not taught those rules until the last semester of law school, and only then because it was going to be on the bar exam, and I had to learn Rule 12, Rule 41, Rule 56, just enough to get through the bar exam. But that's how far back this really goes, that the North Carolina and the bar was so different. The Court of Appeals was only just being created. We were only just adopting the rules of civil procedure. There was no legal aid system, certainly no public defender system. There were a great many things that were different. Now, the collegiality was great. I learned to, and because I was told it was part of my responsibility to handle criminal cases, I was appointed to numbers of things in those early years and young lawyers now probably don't have those experiences. But I tried rape cases and murder cases and those kinds of things, even though most people who would ever see this would think of that I'm a civil lawyer or administrative law lawyer. But I did all of it when we when we began. So I wanted to be sure we talked a little bit about how it was then, without the rules of civil procedure, and the like. Lawyers understood. Most lawyers understood that they needed to do their share of pro bono, even though there was no official legal service of North Carolina. There was one lawyer in town that the Wake Bar was paying a stipend to handle legal services, do the interviews, get somebody to help him if he could. If it was paying work, he could keep it. If it was pro bono, then get some help or handle it himself. It was very primitive at the time, and so one of the things that we've done is to institutionalize a lot of the things that were not that way when people like me began. So it was very different. Raleigh was so different. My bar exam was in the Memorial Auditorium at the end of the street. There was no civic center. There were car dealerships that were no longer active, empty buildings down that street all the way to the Memorial Auditorium, and but very, very different. I watched, at one point my office was in the Durham Life building, Wake County office building, and I watched as they pulled up the trolley tracks out of Fayetteville Street and installed the pedestrian mall, which was a great thing when it was done, and then after 20 or 30 years, it was believed to be a failure and pulled out and all redone again. And yet now, when we walk down Fayetteville Street, it's really not nearly as vibrant as it was, and maybe in those early years when there were still cars going down the street before there was a mall or any of that. The other thing I think was noteworthy for the bar, every lawyer was downtown, except for Pointer, Garrity, Hartsfield, and Townsend. They were in the edge of Cameron Village. And so they were out there, and they were known as suburban lawyers, and that was it. The Beltline didn't go all the way around the city. There were no lawyers out in North Hills and the like. There were one or two in Wake Forest, one or two in Fuquay, one or two in Cary, but essentially the whole bar was downtown Raleigh. And so I was on a committee to advise whether the Wake County Bar should move to Cary in the building that the North Carolina Bar Association was going to build. And the committee advised against it, and we told them we are not the Cary Bar Association. We're the Wake County Bar Association, and we certainly ought to be in Raleigh somewhere. But we have to think back. When I began with only 400 lawyers, when I was president of the Wake County Bar in 1989, we were up to 1,000 lawyers. And so over that time, so what is that, 30 years or something? From 69 to 89, 20 years, we had gone from 400 and some lawyers, more than double. We crossed 1,000. And now we're at 6,000 or something.
More than 6,000.
Yeah, whatever the number is. And so the decision, and the Wake Bar was being run out of one drawer of the elected secretary, and there was no staff. And among the things that I did while I was president of the bar, by that time we had 1,000 lawyers, I created a committee system that had never existed before. And I gave rebirth to the fall barbecue. I thought it was one of the great things that they were doing when in the late 60s when I became part of this bar. Even though at that time when a person went out Six Forks Road, the barbecue was always at Mr. Morkey's cabin with a dirt floor on the front porch, but a scuffling grapevine and a place you could play volleyball. But Newton Road was a gravel road, and the speed limit on that part of Six Fork Road was 55. Once you got to Sandy Forks and that water tank up there, it was all 55 miles an hour. It was pure country, and so, but it had died out. And one of the problems then, and one of the problems now, is how to deal with change, and how to deal with the ongoing growth, and maintain the things that we need to have as a bar to maintain the collegiality for which we are known across the state. We were then, we are now. There were always stories about some other bar where lawyers would serve motions in the courtroom on the other lawyer, and no one would ever speak to each other. We've hopefully always done better than that, because ultimately clients suffer when the lawyers can't communicate effectively. Anyway, it was all very different. Raleigh was far smaller. I remember when I came to Raleigh, there were still ponies where Crabtree Valley Mall is now, and that whole floodplain out there. Kid Brewer had a house up on a hilltop back of where the mall is now, and that. But again, that was essentially country out there, and so there's so much change that the young lawyers would have a hard time grasping how much change we really have seen. In many ways, it's much better. Because before there were the rules of civil procedure, there was no discovery to mount anything. It was trial by ambush. And so now we have, and on the other hand, lawyers spend all their time with interrogatories and requests for admissions and the like, and maybe we'd be better off. We used to settle cases by talking to the lawyer on Fayetteville Street, going back and forth from one building to another, from the courthouse to our office. A lot of these lawyers rarely leave their office at all anymore, and we have many lawyers that claim to be trial lawyers. They're lucky if they try one case a year, and that was not the way it used to be. And the truth is, if a young lawyer wants to be a trial lawyer, then the lawyer's got to try cases, and that means, it may mean that, and we'll get to that at the end about what do I think young lawyers ought to do. But they need to be involved in pro bono, because at least that's one way they may get some trial experience. And for many of our young lawyers, it's darn near impossible to get real effective trial experience and the perspective that gives in terms of how to advise clients.
So I love what you said about how the landscape of the legal profession in Wake County has changed and in your time as a lawyer, and I think that's really insightful. Describe, how did technology have an impact on that?
Well, over time, I've been through 4 or 5 kinds of technology. It was all IBM Selectric typewriters when I came. I had a partner, a mentor, who, if the typewriters got quiet, he was certain we were all going to starve to death, because the clatter of the typewriters was an indication that work was happening. And so we went from that to mag card computers, and to computers with a tiny little screen, Olivetti, I think it was, tiny little screen that would show about a sentence, and then to where we are today. There were successful defense lawyers who were churning documents all day and had 2 secretaries to themselves, working as hard as they go, trying to keep up with everything that lawyer was producing. And now our secretary handles most things for 3 of us, and the lawyers do nearly all the work themselves. And the notion of a legal secretary has largely come and gone. That was to be a legal secretary was the capstone of a clerical career when I came to Raleigh, and now, and there were no paralegals, and title work did not involve title insurance, and it did not involve tying on to to previous title policies. Title work was done on your feet in the register of deeds. And so technology now allows one to sit in the office and go through the records at the register of deeds and the like without ever leaving the office. And now we have lots of paralegals doing that work, and the lawyer is mostly there to supervise the signing of the documents. But on the other hand, the packet of papers for a typical real estate closing then might have been a 1/4 inch, and now it's an enormous ream of paper. People ought to understand, though, that in Raleigh at that time, we had a higher standard of practice than any other place in the state. In Wake County, the standard of care was a 60-year title search, meaning you had to go all the way back, tracing back through the title 60 years to find a solid deed as a foundation and then bring it back forward. Other counties down east, the records were never as good, and they would get away with 30-year and 40-year title searches, and they were looked upon with disdain by the Wake County Bar, where we had higher standards. And Wake County Bar we didn't have online research. Technology has brought us all that, but we had the Supreme Court Library. I used to get substantial referral work from Eastern North Carolina, from Manteo, Elizabeth City, or wherever, because the folks down there knew me, and because we had the Supreme Court Library, and unless they were going to take a day and come to Raleigh to do research or to go to the Duke or UNC law school libraries, they were really going to have a hard time. And so what we have now, there's no excuse for the quality of law practice anywhere in the state not being the equal of what we have here, because technology has leveled the playing field, and those people can do just as good work as any. It was not that they were any or less competent. I mean, there are lazy lawyers everywhere, but most people, if they make a decent living practicing law, the truth is they work pretty darn hard. And but technology has changed the research. Technology has changed now with electronic filing coming in. I'm one of the people who hasn't learned that yet, and I hope I don't have to, because I've got a staff that can do that, and obviously I'm winding down and backing away, because after all, this is now 57 years or something for me with a law license. So yeah, we've seen a lot of change. Technology has made a huge difference. I worry about what it's done to us in terms of collegiality and the actual direct communication, which sometimes gets down to the real point of the matter. I've argued in court sometimes that cases, you may have a foot or two of paper or more, but a case comes down most times to one sheet of paper. And once you get it distilled, and the question is, which sheet of paper is it, and can I be the first one to find it? And so that, while that's important, the communication with the other lawyer, after you know that, it gets down to here. Let's talk about what are we going to do now. That I think that's still the same. You just have so much more paper to have to go through to get down to the nub of the problem. And so the real estate closings have gotten a lot more complicated, a lot more third parties looking over the lawyer's shoulder, a lot people more risk averse. But we used to put out millions over because some lawyer said this title was solid collateral for that loan. And so one of the things that changed over time was that. At one time I did all the closings for State Employees Credit Union, and they did it all over my signature on the quality of the title. There were other lawyers doing all of the title work for First Federal or for Raleigh Savings and Loan. Neither of them even exist anymore. But with no title insurance, it was the bank felt, or the lender felt, entirely appropriate to just, we're going to pick the lawyer. If we're going to bet all our money on the opinion of this one person, we're going to know who that is and know that their work is of the highest quality. So much change in that process that we've seen, really. So how else can I help you?
I want to ask you about mentorship and being a mentor and mentee through your career. You as a mentee from someone, and then you as a mentor. Talk about the value of that in your profession.
Well, the mentor, I knew all the older lawyers, and I was blessed from having been at the Court of Appeals with Judge Brett to end up with at Bailey, Dixon, Wooten at the time, I was the fifth lawyer in a five-lawyer firm. Wright Dixon became a great personal friend, had been president of the Wake County Bar, ended up being president of the state bar, taught me to know all the folks, taught me how important those personal communications were. And we had a wonderful working relationship because I could bring my skills, research from the Court of Appeals, to him, and then often I could take his idea and put law behind it to make him right. But I recall that Ruffin Bailey once said, "Nick, never forget that the law most often is what it ought to be," and and that's why common sense on the part of jurors will often help the jury get to the right decision, even if the lawyers might say they shouldn't have thought through it that way. But the common sense helps jurors get it right 7 out of 10 times in my view.
And that advice, is that what you gave your mentees?
Yes, I certainly told the young lawyers at the first firm I was with for 20 years, and now this one that I've been at Young Moore for 30 plus. Yes, I tell them, find that one piece of paper so that you know what the case boils down to. Communicate with the other lawyers, and never file a motion for sanctions without talking to the other lawyer first, because you might have jumped to a conclusion that's just not appropriate. And as my partner Walter Brock will probably tell you, when you interview him, you give the file to that person and you say, "Don't embarrass us. We have taken 70 years to build up the reputation of this law firm, and we do not want anyone." It's precious to us, the reputation of the law firm as well as the individual lawyers, and it can be so quickly blown up by people who do not maintain the level of integrity, competence, and trust that they ought to have. So yes, that's some of the advice that I've given the younger lawyers. I've also told the younger lawyers, you've got to be involved in the Bar Association. I told them that because at one point I was chairing a committee statewide for the North Carolina Bar Association, and along with Leary Davis, who was then dean of the law school at Campbell, who had been in law school a year or two ahead of me, we did a statewide study, and we documented that a lawyer is twice as likely to have problems with the state bar if that lawyer is not involved in his or her bar associations. And the reason for that is, in my view, not that there was some kind of good old boy network that so that if you were in the in-group that the state bar is going to look the other way. That is absolutely not the case. But it's because lawyers need to network, because you need people in the firm that you're with and others outside the firm with whom you are comfortable in talking, and that will help you to maintain the ability to avoid temptation and to do the wrong thing and to cut corners and potentially throw away what could have been a great career. So I'm a great believer in the Bar Association, and I've told lots of young lawyers, you need to be involved in the bar. Never let there be a time that you're not on some bar committee. Whether it's the Wake County Bar, whether it's the North Carolina Bar Association, the trial lawyers, whatever it is. And secondly, always have some work on your desk that you know you're not going to get paid for, because that you need to maintain your perspective and your humanity, and it will help you the quality of all your other work. And besides that, any lawyer has been blessed with more than average talent at birth, and therefore there's more than average obligation to share that talent and to give back to others. And it's not enough to grab material goods for oneself. One needs to use that talent. Otherwise, why were you given it if you weren't going to use it? So And that was, of course, part of the ethical foundation of my childhood the same way. I see it in my brothers, neither of whom was a lawyer, but I understood the significance of giving back to the community one way or another.
And you touched on ethics and you talked about your ethical principles. Can you describe an ethical dilemma that you may have had during your career?
Well, I hope that I was able. The basic rule of ethics that Dean Weathers taught us in the law school was, what we got out of it was real simple. If you had to ask yourself if this was the right thing to do, then you already knew the answer was no. If the issue comes up, then don't do it. He would even refuse to plead the statute of limitations on someone if the claim, in his opinion, was legitimate. He would not advise his client to plead the statute, even though time had passed. I don't know that everyone would take that view today. Some would say that if the claim is that old, then there's every reason to think that the evidence is that stale, and that there are problems in the case. And so, no, plead the statute and get rid of it. But I think ethics also involves doing the right thing when it isn't necessarily the easy thing. I prosecute cases for the Board of Law Examiners. There's a case and a head note that I quote sometimes in there, and that character is doing the thing because it is right, not always because it's easy, and so that I think is important as well. I recall a case I had one time. A politician from the eastern part of the state ended up being pretty prominent, and he had been a local government official, and there were accusations being made and a lot of stuff in media, and the question was whether he was going to be charged and tried for improper use of his position. And I got hold of the district attorney down there. I went through the stuff, satisfied myself that there had been no impropriety, that he was only trying to recruit industry to that rural county that needed it, and he was paying for some of the stuff out of his pocket just because he believed in doing the right thing for his county. But I got on the phone with the district attorney and told him that we would win the case if he indicted him. We would win that case because we had evidence, but he could destroy a good public servant if he charged him, because by the time that person went through the ringer of a trial and all the attendant publicity and the media dealing with it, his career could be destroyed. And to what purpose? Because sometimes a not guilty verdict isn't enough to remedy the damage done to that person. And so the district attorney in that county thought about it, or in that district, called me back in a couple of weeks and said, I'm not going to charge him. And I thought it was a courageous decision on his part. So sometimes the most important legal work you can do is work that no one ever knew about. And I give great value to that district attorney for having the guts to do the right thing when he wasn't going to get the conviction, but he could have decided, well, it's a question for the court and the jury, and I'm just going to hand it off that way. I give myself credit for having convinced him of the importance of doing right, even though it might not be easy. And so I view that as having been important. I'll tell you one other case that I thought was important because it shows the change in the bar, among other things. Early on, I think I told you that I was being appointed to various cases because even though I was in a civil law firm, the law firm thought it was the right thing to do and that a young lawyer ought to do it, and it would give that lawyer some trial experience and the like anyway. So Judge Pugh Bailey sent word that he was appointing me to this rape case, and out of one of the low poverty housing projects, and this person was charged with having raped a 12-year-old girl with special needs, hydroencephalitis. It was just terrible facts, and they had a bloodstained quilt with which was had her blood type on it, and it came out of his place. And I went back over to Judge Bailey, and I say I was out of law school. Maybe I'd clerked a year, maybe I'd practiced a year, and then he's appointed me to this terrible case. And I said, "Are you sure, Judge, that you want to put me on this? I mean, I've tried a few things, but nothing like this." And he said, "Nick, I could appoint anybody to this case, and they would slop through the case some way. But if I put you on him, you'll be scared to death. You'll work your butt off, and he'll get a fair defense." There were two things as a result. I was scared to death. I worked my can off. I walked on foot through the housing developments to talk to people down there about what they'd seen or anything they knew about it. And I kept telling my client, you got to take a plea. This is going to be awful. I don't see how we're coming out of this. And he absolutely refused to do it. He said, "I didn't do it. I'm innocent. I'm not pleading. And I don't care whether it makes sense or it doesn't make sense, but I'm not doing it." And so he had the backbone to go try the case. I'm not sure I had the backbone to try the case. Maybe I was making a business decision that there was too much risk and he should take some sort of plea and let's get out of here. We ended up getting the not guilty verdict because I was ultimately able to show that the same blood type of this victim was the same as the defendant and was the same as the defendant's mother. And the mother had terrible diabetes and sores on her legs. And I was able to get a psychiatric testimony that adolescent girls and boys are particularly vulnerable to sexual fantasies and the like, and perhaps even more so if they're of limited capacity or special needs. And and the jury concluded that there was reasonable doubt under it all. But to me, it underscores a couple things. Number one, the system that we had when I came that said that which was fairly new, that they had a right to counsel, and we used to laugh and say, "Yeah, the defendant has a right to a lawyer, but not necessarily a good lawyer." And now I got to believe we're better off with this public defender system, that people who are doing that work every day, that would know the nuances and the like. I believe these defendants are better off. Now, we've had wonderful lawyers stepping in to help and try capital cases, and there's often enough money for those. But the money for the indigent system, when it was only a fourth or something of what most lawyers would be getting paid for their other work, was nowhere near adequate. And you ended up getting a lot of, either you're appointing young lawyers like I was, that you'd have to wonder, maybe Judge Bailey was right, that the defendant got a good defense in that case, but one would have to wonder about that, and that's why we're so much better off today, I think, with the public defender system. And so, among other things, we're way better off now with our system for legal services to the poor, simple legal services. Yes, we need a lot more volunteer help to help legal services do that work. But these changes are much to the good compared to how it was when I began. And I think progress has been slow, but our guardian ad litem program now is way better than what it was. Many ways we have improved things, even though it's become institutionalized. And now lawyers go to work in some firm, many of them, and have minimal experience across the board. We've hired numbers of lawyers to do, let's say, estate planning that have come from a small town and have done a little of everything. They're better lawyers because they spot issues, they know problems, they see what can go wrong when documents are not prepared right because they have that breadth of practice. I do think we've lost ground by having lawyers specialize way too early, and lawyers are because of that they don't have that breadth of practice, they don't have the breadth of experience, they don't have the ability to pick up on subtle differences that others might that have had more experience and a broader experience. So I think that's the good and bad of change.
I have just a few more questions, but I wanted to ask you. I want to go back to one thing that you said. You mentioned that years ago you talked about an old boys club. Do you think that was the case earlier in your career, and has that changed now? And how have you seen that?
Well, there were only 3 girls in my law school class. There weren't very, very many females lawyers here when I came. A handful, and there were lawyers, female lawyers, who were teased and derided behind closed doors. But we've seen tremendous progress gender-wise. We've seen tremendous progress with regard to race. We have. I saw among those older lawyers when I came. No, there was not, in my view, a good old boys club. But certainly, when I came, there were defendants not getting the defense that they deserved, and I've seen how we've improved on it as I mentioned. But I got to meet and talk with Mr. Carnage, who had been an early African American lawyer here. I learned later that he had been a big part of the early civil rights struggles. Unfailingly gentlemanly in his, and always wearing that suit and tie. Nothing sloppy about him. Now, of course, we have lawyers who would wear golf shirts every day if they thought they could. And maybe Mr. Carnage thought he needed to dress up a notch or two more than some others, because he was always going to be in a spotlight as one of the early African American lawyers, but he was a very capable guy and a true gentleman. I worked with Mr. Stanley Seligson, whose family owned the old city market, and they owned lots of rental property, and he was getting work from all grades of people, but when we were appointed to represent co-defendants. Because of my being appointed to those cases, I got to know him, and I might never have otherwise. But I thought that most of the lawyers understood. Maybe they were not all what Atticus Finch, but they understood that we lawyers are there to make this system work for everyone. And I think most lawyers knew that then. There were certainly lawyers that we would now view as racist. There were lawyers that maybe didn't really know any better. But there were lots of lawyers who did know better and were trying to work to produce change. And it's okay to be conservative or progressive as long as we understand that I was taught the law is a profession and not a mere money-getting trade. That's a quote from one of my professors. I think most lawyers, when I came and still, know that this is a profession, and it's not just a way to make the most money that one can. Dean Weathers told us when we finished our legal ethics class with him, now gentlemen, I want you to go out and make a good living, but more than that, I want you to go out and make a good life.
Well, that's the next thing I want to ask you. Tell me about your life outside the law through all these years.
Well, I have always been involved with bar activities. I think I volunteered for a bar committee with the North Carolina Bar because the current president of the North Carolina Bar Association was from my hometown. And I said, could you put me on the administrative law committee because I'm trying to develop in that area? And he said, well, they're not doing anything, Nick, and you will. I'm going to make you chairman. And so from there, I've been on bar committees, and I did 10 years on the State Bar Grievance Committee. So I've done lots of bar activities. I'm proud that after Trump's insurrection, the January 6th thing, along with a handful of others, we created a nonpartisan, nonprofit voter registration effort. And as of now, here we are 3.5, almost 4 years later, we will have registered hundreds of thousands of voters because we came upon techniques and tools that could do it cheaper and faster than it had been done to reach people that we knew were going to have to get registered because they had moved here. And if you've moved, then your registration is screwed up. So one of the ways to do it is whether you came here from Texas, Rhode Island, or Wake Forest, you're going to have to change your registration. So I'm proud of that. I helped on these video interviews for the Wake County Bar's History Committee for probably 20 years.
Did you the whole one?
I did lots of them. My mentor, Wright Dixon, was one of those that started it, and eventually he came over to my new firm where I had gone and says, I got to hand the ball, and I'm going to hand the ball to you. And so I did it for a long time, and we did a lot of them, and there are more to be done, certainly. And
Well, that leads me to my next question. Who else do you think we should interview?
well, goodness, I would, of course, I get increasingly out of touch with it, but I think it's important that we get people who are in their 50s, late 50s, 60, or thereabouts. And I know it's frustrating for some of the bar that so many of those interviews we did were white males, but we were working to get the African-American lawyers and the women as they began to come along. So there will be a time where we have equal numbers of male and females or more females, and it'll happen. But the need to interview these older lawyers is going to lag in terms of gender because we've got to feed all these people into the system and for them to have a career so that they can have useful advice. And so we can preserve a little bit of who they are and who they were. But so what else have I done? I've sung in the choir at the church. I've been president of my Kiwanis Club. We raised $400,000 to rehab a city park and to create a playground for children of all levels of ability because some of these old playgrounds here with sawdust on the ground, you can't push wheelchairs through wet sawdust, and we did things that mattered. There were lots of years when I was paying my dues to that civic club, and I just didn't have time to go. But I kept on paying, and I would help when I could, but work was really heavy. And so eventually I got to the place that I thought, I'm going to fix it so I'm not mediating on Fridays anymore. I'm going to go to those meetings. And I ended up becoming president and leading their centennial effort. So I've done a lot. But anyway, a lot with the bar. I developed a niche in administrative practice and particularly administrative law and licensing. And that I'm proud of having created a lot of that structure that lots of other boards are now using in terms of how to enforce against people with no license and the hearing structures and the law.
And do you think those outside things, like being civically minded and being with your church and your family and your friends, do you think that helps you be a better lawyer?
Yeah, I think you need a work-life balance. I think that's really, really important because you've got to have healthy ways to handle stress. I do think it makes one a better lawyer. I think having social friends that are not lawyers helps remind one of what non-lawyers don't understand about the work that we do. But I also think that we can straighten those things out, but it also gives us perspective on how life works for the non-lawyers as well as the lawyers, and helps us keep connected to our community. So there's probably never been a political campaign that I wasn't doing a little something in over the last 30, 40 years. I've got too much work to be a full-time Politico, and I've never run for office. But, I had 40 people at my house a couple nights ago, and with lots of candidates there. And so at this point, I can write bigger checks than I used to be able to write, because I've been lucky. My kids have done well. They don't need me to set them up, and I'm very proud that they don't need to be carried. Same as my mother was proud and was able to give her money for scholarships and stuff, because her kids were not going to need to be propped up by her. So, and my father felt the same way. So I hope that we will still be using a book like this Practicing Law book, the Wake County Bar's booklet. I hope that we will still be using that or a later, more recent edition of that, because those basic stories, I wrote one of those pieces in there, and it's still true that you can learn more about a lawyer in a game of lawyer league basketball than you might any other way, because a lawyer who won't call a foul on him or herself in basketball probably can't be trusted otherwise either. And so it's the little things. And so those lawyers need to belong. They need to communicate so that they can maintain that kind of balance. Now, sure, we have lawyers that are out the door at 5 o'clock, and the older ones like me don't think they seem to work very hard, but the truth is they're probably having supper with the kids and then logging on from home and working 2 more hours after that. But we worked awfully hard, and we thought we were happy, and that we were doing what we ought to be doing, and that we were doing the things that we ought to be doing with our kids, and finding a way to sneak out the back door and go see a soccer game and whatever we needed to be doing. So I'm very proud that I turned out to be a lawyer. I hope that I've been a good one, but I'm very proud to be part of this bar. I'm very proud of this bar, and I'm very proud that I'm a part of it. But it requires ongoing maintenance. And most things in life require work. If we want to have a good, high-quality collegial bar, it's going to require work, same as it always has.
Thank you, Nick. We appreciate it. This was great.